Howdy and welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I want to do a kind of a book review from Karl Rehn's Strategies and Standards for Defensive Handgun Training, but I also want to take the data from this book and then from some other sources that I have, and I really want to talk about how good is good enough. I know as firearms guys and people that train, we want to know, okay, how good is good enough? There's all these drills out there that you see people online, and they're just burning down drills and going super fast. And while I personally believe that everybody should strive to become a black belt in firearms handling, and I'm striving to get as good as I can, that kind of seems to be an unattainable goal. I want to look at some realistic data, some hard data on what should we be really training? What should be the skills that we should be practicing? What are some good drills that will kind of simulate that? And this is kind of the $1,000,000 question. But I'm going to kind of dig through some info from this book. I highly recommend it. I believe it is on par with Cooper's Principles of Personal Defense. I think if you're a serious gun guy, if you want to know the history kind of where we've gotten where we're at with regarding training, I believe it is a great book, and it's newly released, I believe, just within the last year. But talk a little bit about Karl. Karl is the owner of KR Training, and Mr. John Daub actually helped him write that book. But Karl is what I would call one of the OGs or the original trainers in Texas. When Texas became a shall issue state of the concealed carry license in '95, there were only a handful of people that could, one, teach the class, but then there was a huge demand for basically training counselors or people that wanted to become firearms trainers, and Karl was one of the very few people in the state that actually had the credentials to give those classes to basically teach people to become instructors. So Karl has been doing this for a very long time. Let's kind of look at some data first, then we'll talk about some skills, and then we'll kind of talk about some drills that kind of wrap everything and put everything into perspective. So we can actually look at some of the FBI data. One of the reasons why we can do that is because most FBI officers are plain clothes, they're not marked vehicles, they carry concealed, and so we can kind of treat them as civilians. So 92% of this data, I believe it was from the late 80s to the early 90s, but nonetheless, the distance of engagement was 92%, between 2 to 3 yards. Average rounds 3.2. Tom Gibbons of Rangemaster. Tom Gibbons, once again, is one of the most well-renowned firearms experts, and once again, an OG to the firearms training. I love Tom's approach because Tom basically trains to the numbers. He's not this rah-rah, gung-ho, gun guy. He's looks at the hardcore data, and he basically wants everybody to go home. That if they're in a gunfight or whatnot, he wants them to go home safely. That's his goal. He trains people to basically the data, and I really enjoy that. So let's look at Tom Gibbons' information. So Tom has actually had 65 students. Tom Gibbons owns Rangemaster. Tom has had 65 students involved in basically shooting instances. I believe 62 have won. The 3 that lost by default because they didn't bring a gun to the fight. So anyway, at a Rangemaster conference that they had several years ago, they brought up 10 students to do a presentation, and this is the data from those 10 students. So 50% were involved in an armed robbery between 1 to 2 people. 3 occurred in parking lots. 1 occurred at home. If you just look at the data, in one of my previous videos I did parking lots, quite a bit of attacks happen in parking lots. John Correa talks about that being a transitional space. In all but one, the range was inside the length of a car. When we talk about distances for training, a lot of times we're going to hear between 3 to 7 yards. Well, where does that 7 yards comes from? That is the standard length of a car. So kind of makes sense. 40% of those had 2 or more suspects, and the average shots fired 3.8. So that's the data. So let's take that data and let's look at the skills kind of compiled by Karl and Mr. Tom Givens and some other people. So as a civilian concealed carrier, what are the main primary skills that I need to be practicing? And we can sum it up as this. I need to make multiple hits from concealment in a small area. So we're talking about human anatomy. I usually, when I work beginning students, we shoot a B8 target. The reason why I do that B8 simulates an 8-inch circle, is the human anatomy. That 8-inch circle is the vital zone or high center thoracic on a human target. It's below the sternal notch, above the diaphragm, between the nipples. That is 8-inch. So in a small area, from close range, very quickly. So those are the key things. Multiple hits from concealment in a small area from close range quickly. So let's look at some drills that can pertain to that. So once again, how good is good enough? So here's several ones, and one of the things that we can actually look at this data, guys, is you've only got about maximum 5 seconds. That gunfight's going to last, 5 seconds, typically no more. So the work that you need to get done, the rounds that you need to have, they need to last those 5 seconds. So Gila Hayes, she has her 5-5-5 drill. So that's 5 rounds at 5 yards in 5 seconds in a 5-inch circle. You have your typical 3-3-3, so 3 rounds, 3 steps, or 3 yards within 3 seconds. That's very common. That's another good one. That is essentially in in the vital zone of a B8 or an IPSC target. Another good drill is Bill Wilson's Bill drill. That is 6 rounds from concealment at 7 yards. The original par time was 5 seconds. I believe now it's almost the industry standard. A good solid time for a competent shooter is under 3 seconds. Scott Jedlinski actually has his requirement for the class. In order to meet the class standards, that's 2.5, and then for his black belt patch is 2 seconds. That is blazing fast, but nonetheless, the Bill drill is a great option. And then last, Karl Rehn actually has his 3 seconds or less drills. So the distances vary and the shots vary, but like I said, you're typically going to have 5 seconds or less to do what you need to do to win that gunfight. Another good information that is in this book, and like I said, we're mainly talking about concealed carry. I'm not talking necessarily about police, military, anything like that. But there's a lot of skills. There's a lot of things that are being taught in the firearms training community that are unnecessary, that are redundant, that come from a different era. One example I'm going to give you is teaching pistol from the prone. Where that came from, you got to remember that actually came from the FBI. Quantico was set up in an old Marine Corps back actually in the swamp. That's where Quantico was set up in the late 30s. When the FBI started carrying firearms, they needed firearms trainers. Well, heck, I'm on a Marine base. Let's go get some Marines to teach us how to train. Marines first, last and foremost, are riflemen. And one of the first things that they teach riflemen is when stuff starts going bad, boom, go prone, hit the deck. You're much safer down there. It's more stable to shoot. So that's where that came from. And the FBI actually did that up until the 90s or the early 2000s, but they're no longer doing that anymore. But there's a bunch of information in here about things that are not really important to civilians, things that we need to focus on less, and the real skills that we need to train. But guys, just remember, close distances from concealment. making first-round effective hits. Anyway, I hope this video has been somewhat helpful. Like I said, guys, go read this book if you're interested about the history of kind of handgun training and kind of where we've gotten to where we're at now. Good information, good hard data on, is a civilian handgun a carrier civilian, good information on a civilian carrier of a handgun. What skills should we train to? What should we really put our emphasis on? Our goal is to become the best that we can at what we do. So we need to take seriously the rights that we have. We need to be responsible with our firearms. Like I said, learn how to use them safely and effectively if the time arises. But Karl Rehn, Strategies and Standards, guys, go get that book. It's phenomenal. I refer back to it quite a bit in addition to some other materials, but great book from Karl and Mr. John Daub. Thank you guys for watching. Be safe, be smart, be skilled. Catch you on the next video.